Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Knockout Podcast, episode 61. Welcome back, everyone. Back for another week of unpacking the weird and wonderful in the world of MMA. We come back after a pretty stacked UFC 263 that had some ups and downs and some pretty interesting moments that we'll get to. And we've also got the Korean Zombie-Dan Ige card to sort of flirt with a bit at the towards the end. But our main focus will be 263 at the weekend. As ever, I'm joined by Jack. Jack, what were your sort of thoughts of 263 over the weekend?
Hi everyone. Yeah, I thought they were good. I thought it was fairly decent, to be fair. Really impressed or exciting in some places, and then kind of a bit weird and not so great in others. But overall, I thought it was fairly solid. And I suppose like an early shout out would go to Brandon Moreno's win as like a feel good moment of the year. Honestly, like watching him kind of like celebrate and break down and watch the emotion pour out in the cage after he won was really, really fantastic. To be honest, I really enjoyed that, and I was like, oh, instant fan of Brandon Moreno after that. And it was a fantastic performance as well. So
it was. We'll get onto him in a second, but we may as well start with the main event. Israel Adesanya defeating Marvin Vettori 50-45 unanimously and comfortably across the board. This sort of went how it went, although there is a few things I do want to touch on, but in terms of we didn't think Vettori would perhaps have the technical and sort of strategic abilities to sort of map out a win against Adesanya, and it largely went to in that way. You know, there were some hairy moments, but it was pretty comfortable for Izzy.
yeah, it was. It was a weird one that like this is probably one of the fights that I was saying that was a bit like if he was like fairly comfortable and dominant throughout, but still looked not particularly impressive, which is weird because like the two fight or like well he's had a few now, but it's weird that two of those fights in his career both come against Marvin Vettori. It just seems like he's got a bit of a weird kind of style for Izzy to deal with. But yeah, we talked before about how Izzy's game mostly kind of builds off of the jab and the low kick. And I think he just, despite having a lot of success with that, he couldn't build off it like he could do in, say, previous fights. And really was kind of confined to that, which, like, I mean, if it was working, fair enough. But you do want to see kind of the layers start to build up over time, which they didn't really come in this fight.
Yeah, no, I think it was an interesting one, and you did touch on it that I did want to get into was the perhaps not the complete performance that perhaps Adesanya showed against Whittaker and Paulo Costa that perhaps people would have said on paper might represent tougher challenges. I think probably part of that is just the absolute just machine that Marvin Vettori is in terms of, although he did look like he was getting damaged by those kicks, he did just continue to plow on, and the amount of damage he could take is just very impressive and aided his ability just to sort of reset and just go again, just sort of marching down Adesanya. I think certainly one thing I wanted to touch on was the ability of Vettori to get Adesanya to the cage. It was something we certainly talked about in the Costa fight in terms of, you know, we know Costa loves to do his best work up against the cage, piling on those body shots. And it was something he just could not get. He could not get into the fight because he just couldn't get him to the cage. In this fight with Vettori, Adesanya did find himself on a number of occasions up against the back of the cage for you know the first time, on sort of a frequent occasion. The only problem is that when he was there, Vettori just seemed to certainly was just far too predictable in terms of the game plan was quite clearly to go for the double leg and take him down, which I think if Adesanya has proven anything, he is very competent anti-wrestler, especially against the fence. So interesting in one sense in terms of Adesanya was able to be forced back, but also disappointing from Vettori that there wasn't more variety or more sort of ability to get the best out of those scenarios when he did have Adesanya backing up.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. He did it. Vettori did do quite a good job of he really did. He had quite a lot of success in the first fight, double jabbing Adesanya, and he did that a lot, which was one of the main things he used to kind of push him back. And he was able to consistently force Adesanya to the cage. But as you said, it's a shame in a way that Paulo Costa wasn't the one. If you combine Paulo Costa and Vettori, you might have had something there for Adesanya, to be honest, because Costa, when he's got other people against the cage, has been very dangerous. He's he hits harder than Vettori, and also his shot selection is so much better. Vettori was literally he'd double jab and then follow in with a slow left hand that was terrible. He I think I saw him shoot one or two body shots. But yeah, when he got Adesanya to the cage, was just all straight punches, nothing round, nothing to the body really, no kicks either, which Costa would do. So yeah, it's a shame you couldn't kind of combine the skill sets of both of them, and it could have been a lot more fun, both of those fights. But yeah, that's a shame. But there's also Vettori did have a lot of success with it, but there is a small part of me that thinks that, considering that Vettori was really heavily leaning on his wrestling, or that was his main route to success, I think, in his mind for this fight, and knowing that Adesanya's takedown defense against the cage is very, very good, however, out in open isn't particularly good. It's a massive difference. He really has kind of trained his takedown defense for MMA and for the cage. That it could possibly be somewhat of a deliberate decision on Adesanya's part to fight purposefully with his back against the cage, because he knew that it would really aid his takedown defense. So I think that Vettori did kind of especially kind of early on, kind of push him back. But I think kind of later on in the fight, it might have been kind of a bit purposeful on Adesanya's part to just kind of let that happen, because he knew that by that time, late on, that Vettori didn't have anything for him in the striking when his back was against the cage. He knew he couldn't take him down there, and he had been taken down in open space twice already. So I think that probably played a bit of a part, that he was I'm just gonna fight with my back to the cage because I can fight just as well. He can't hurt me, and it protects from the takedowns essentially.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I hadn't properly thought about it from that point of view, but that certainly makes sense as well. But a pretty comprehensive win for Adesanya. I mean, there's not too much more we can say. Good for Adesanya to get back down to middleweight. Good win, not his best win, but he also feels like someone who sort of raises his performance level relative to the level of threat that he faces, and perhaps some of his best performances have come against some of his most sort of dangerous opponents on paper, at least. I mean, for Adesanya, the Whittaker fight seems like the obvious one next.
I mean, there is no other fight.
Yeah, there is no other fight.
Whittaker deserved it before Vettori, and now after Vettori, Adesanya even you had the champion calling out a challenger. When does that happen? There literally is no other fight at middleweight, and whenever them two are ready, whenever suits both of them best, just get it done.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I said this before when Whittaker beat Cannonier, and basically, well, I guess maybe when he beat Cannonier, and also probably when he beat Gastelum, but I don't know what the COVID policies are around in Oceania, but it would seem a stadium fight in Australia or New Zealand would be, would make a hell of a lot of sense. I mean, it sold a hell of a lot of tickets the first times, and if they're opening up, which I think they are, I think that would make a hell of a lot of sense. For Vettori, I mean, there's plenty of contenders. I mean, Paulo Costa has recently pulled out of his fight. I mean, that's someone that could be an interesting proposition. The last two guys to lose to Adesanya at middleweight, but I mean, there's plenty of guys that he can mix it up with at middleweight. Moving on to the co-main, and your sort of moment of the if you like, moment of the night rather, something that you mentioned a bit. Brandon Moreno defeating Davison Figueiredo, flying in the face of our sort of pretty steadfast. Guaranteed that we thought that Figueiredo would get the job done. We'll get on to Figueiredo. Well, I guess we'll get on to Moreno in a bit, but I do want to talk about Figueiredo a bit because there was obviously weight cutting issues, and I don't want to be the kind of person that just says, it was Figueiredo wasn't Figueiredo didn't turn up, and if he did, he would have won, because I think, as we'll get on to, Moreno did make a lot of impressive adjustments, but he did look out of sorts in there, sort of paralysed, and he didn't really look particularly healthy, which is a shame. But putting that all aside, it was still a fantastic performance from Brandon Moreno.
I do agree, and on the night, on the first watch, that was kind of one of my primary takeaways, I'd say. Like, I really thought Figueiredo really isn't in it here. He doesn't look best. He has had the weight cutting issues. That's probably affecting him. However, I have watched it back since, and I think that's kind of like bumped down on my list of like reasons why the fight played out. On a second watch, like noticing kind of like the improvements that Moreno made, I think that was far more significant than Figueiredo just being off. I think that Moreno came in looking absolutely fantastic. And whilst I would say that Figueiredo might not have quite been at his best, I think by the second, I think it was first round especially, he was looking like, I think comparisons like this have been made before, but Figueiredo is a bit like a flyweight Romero. And the first round especially looked kind of similar to, before he got hurt at least, similar to say like Whittaker Romero too. Figueiredo really was kind of like not doing much, kind of frozen by the jab.
I mean, seven strikes to 25 in that first round.
Yeah. So yeah, like really not doing much. But I think by the second round, he'd kind of, I think it was more kind of like, I suppose like, I don't know, just like he had to get over that first round. And then I think in the second and third round, like the second was mostly grappling, but in the like on the feet, he looked fairly what I'd expect Figueiredo to look like, to be honest. I think he'd gotten over kind of the first round. And Moreno was still too much for him, even then. So yeah, I think that all props go to Brandon Moreno for that. But with the kind of little bit of the asterisks of like Figueiredo is really struggling to make the weight and might need to go up.
Yeah, I generally think I would be. I mean, we'll see what he wants to do. I don't know whether an immediate sort of trilogy is warranted, especially after the way that this fight went out. But I would probably be surprised if Figueiredo hangs around at 125 any longer, because I think even cutting to 135 seems a pretty big task for him. So, not having to cut those extra 10 pounds to 125 probably is needed. But as you say, yeah, props have got to go to Moreno. I mean, the boxing was just amazing in that first round. I mean, you're not going to be short of good boxing training, good boxing sparring in Mexico.
Oh, yeah.
And he certainly made the most of that. He was just, the combos were there. I think it was so clear to see, as you say, if you're going to use that sort of Romero type comparison with Figueiredo, Figueiredo sort of firing that sort of 1 and 2 shots. Moreno was piecing together some lovely combos right from the get-go. And and I think, you know, as you say, the weight was an issue, but I think he was paralyzed. He just, you know, he was just stunned into inactivity because he couldn't find a way to get in past sort of Moreno's combination, sort of, you know, high output, but also, you know, great accuracy and great effectiveness. You know, I didn't think Moreno was going to drop Figueiredo, but he did. You know, was great on the ground in that second round, and then obviously getting the finish in the third. It was, you know, given that we were going in saying, I don't know how Moreno is going to get past this Figueiredo, given how much damage he took, and we weren't sure if there was any, you know, viable improvements he could make, whether he sort of maxed out his talent. I mean, we were proven wrong in quite the most emphatic fashion.
No, I think after the fight, Nonito Donaire tweeted that like he'd been working with Moreno, and you can like the improvements he's made in those 6 months were just astounding, to be honest. Like we talked about like how Figueiredo looked off or looked frozen, and I think the being dropped by the jab you can put in a way down to the weight cut, but the being frozen, especially upon the second watch, really looked to me like that he was just paralyzed by Moreno's jab, because it was like amazing. Like he was like tripling up on the jab, like mixing in feints with committed jabs that like Figueiredo just really had a tough time trying to like set his own range. Like there were times that you could see Figueiredo like coming, trying to like edge in like he does to try and kind of land one of his counters, and then he just like he thinks he's at a safe range, and then Moreno can just get him with the jab. And then it was just like Figueiredo wasn't able to pressure like he was in the last fight, or in pretty much all of his previous fights, really. And the combo work, like the mixing up levels with the combo, like going head body leg, or like just going up and down, like working the whole body, and it was fantastic from Moreno. And then, as you said, the grappling at the end, like the takedown before the finish was lovely. Like the kind of Figueiredo did kind of like twist into it, which allowed Moreno to take the back, but the back take, like he jumped on that and it was very slick and got the finish. Overall, a fantastic performance from Moreno, I think.
Yeah, no, and certainly one that, you know, you mentioned the post-fight scenes, one that I was very happy to be proven wrong. You know, first Mexican, is it Mexican-born UFC champion? Is that how they were framing it?
Because I think that they can't say first Mexican, because I think Cain Velasquez would be very annoyed at them.
Yeah.
So I think they're saying he's like Mexican-born and raised or something like that, because I think Cain was born in America.
Yeah, well, certainly, you know, got the submission, sort of walked around sort of nonchalantly, and then I think it all sort of like sunk in, and it was all very emotional. But yeah, amazing for him. Interesting to see what happens next. I mean, I think I've been seeing that sort of Askar probably seems like the next guy in contention. He had a great win against Joseph Benavidez, but there is probably the option of a trilogy down the line if Figueiredo stays at flyweight, and to be honest, that seems a big if that probably should be a solid no from him and his team.
I think it's a tough one for Figueiredo because I don't know like what he's kind of like currently got going on in the minute in terms of like a nutritionist, but if he can like and really get the weight cut on point, I think he's got much better chances at flyweight than he does at bantamweight. So I understand why he would want to stay at flyweight, because like I think that he would, even though he is struggling with the cut, I think he would be undersized at bantamweight, and I think he matches up not very nicely with Jan, who would be presumably at a certain point probably someone he will face for the title, or someone he will certainly have to be to get to the title. So
yeah, because he came in, obviously missed weight in that first Joseph Benavidez fight, and then for the second one, I distinctly remember it being reported that he'd got his weight under control. He'd come into the final week with only sort of 10 pounds to shed, and he'd been sort of not living the life, because I'm sure he does, but in terms of having a better sort of nutritional plan for his camp to get himself arriving at fight week at a sort of cuttable weight. And I don't know whatever went awry this week, but I'm sure there'll be some conversation certainly as to his future at 125. But we'll see. And yeah, best of luck for Brandon Moreno in his first defense, whoever that may be against. Right, we'll move down to the final 5-rounder, really scheduled 5-rounder of the evening. Leon Edwards, Nate Diaz, and Jack. You know what? Fair play, because you absolutely hit the nail on the head. You know, Leon Edwards, he's had 4.5 rounds of quality, outpointing Nate Diaz, and all he'll be remembered for is 2 minutes at the end when he was hanging on for dear life. I mean, the poor basically sums up Leon Edwards' last sort of 2 years is a 5-round win against Nate Diaz doesn't even basically doesn't even go down as a win because he's not allowed to be wobbled for the last 2 minutes or be trying to hold on when he's won the first 4 rounds.
Yeah, no, I said it was like a really tough fight for Leon Edwards to look good in, and that was like that turned out to be more true than I could have imagined, really. Because realistically, he was beating the brakes off of Nate Diaz for 23-24 minutes. But then, as you said, he gets caught with one left hand and like he's on skates, and that's pretty much like you've even got like official ESPN like accounts tweeting under Stockton rules or whatever. And unbelievable, really. I really did feel bad for Leon Edwards for that. Although that comes kind of with the criticism of at some point you've really kind of got to step up and really like if you've got Leon Edwards' style where you kind of know that you do fade a little bit down the stretch, you've really sometimes got like you have to really put it to people and try and finish them, especially where you're outmatching them so much like he was in this fight. That I think there is a criticism of Leon there that he didn't really try and push it and go for the finish. He did kind of coast, and I think that is a tendency within him. Other than that, it was fantastic. Like he really did like dominate Nate for most of he got Nate really fighting against type. Nate was looking for kind of like singular big moments, which like for the first 4 rounds, I was like, oh, that's not going to work out for Nate. That's not how Nate fights. That isn't his kind of route to success. That I was proven wrong with that. But yeah, like Nate was having to fight like a puncher, which he isn't really, but apparently he might also be. Leon looked very good. Generally, did all the right things, and even had those cool kind of Thai foot sweep things where he dumped Nate, and there are very few moments where Nate Diaz will congratulate an opponent and give him a thumbs up or say good job, but he I think Leon got 2 of those in this fight, which really speaks volumes. So that was quite cool, but also insane at the end, really.
Yeah, the Diaz brand is just unbreakable. Yeah. I mean, he's come off the a 49-46 unanimous decision, but the sort of general conversation around him is as if he's just shocked the world and beaten Kamaru Usman for the belt or something. It's remarkable. But yeah, I mean, a good performance from Edwards. I mean, I don't really know where he goes from here. He probably isn't going to get the title shot. It looks like that's going to go to
so unfortunate.
I think if he's not going to get the title fight, I don't know whether he sits it out. If there's a guarantee that he gets the winner, I mean, something like a Masvidal fight is something that there is a backstory behind, and I also feel like is favourable for him. But I sort of feel like I don't feel like it's in the sort of Diaz camp to the same extent, but I don't know whether a similar thing could happen where it's difficult for him to come out of a Masvidal fight positively. I don't know, but it'll be interesting to see what he does. But as you say, I think there is a tendency to coast in these fights, and I still don't know to what extent he's genuinely been pushed. I mean, yeah, those sort of last 2 minutes were, tricky and he had to survive. But we're talking sort of, from the offset, at least he sort of comfortably settle into his rhythm. And I don't know how well that sets him up for a potential fight against Covington or Usman, whereby he's going to be, from minute one is going to have to, really, be on it, and he's going to have a lot of stuff coming his way. So interesting one for Edwards. I'm sorry, was there anything more you wanted to add?
Well, I'd say like kind of in that regards, like in terms of matchmaking, I think either a Masvidal fight or even, to be honest, like I don't think Covington deserves a rematch with Usman yet. Like I don't know, I'm just not particularly interested in that. So I would prefer, honestly, maybe Edwards Covington, and then say like Wonderboy Usman. Like I think Wonderboy is more deserving of a title shot to me than Covington is. So that's probably how I'd matchmake it. But obviously I don't get a say. But yeah, Edwards kind of like with potential matchups. I think that he does struggle in that in fights where he is controlling the pace, he can fade, which like you really can't be doing that. Like if you're setting the pace, you've got to be able to keep that up, and you've got to be able to put enough damage on your opponent to sometimes get the finish. So I don't know. I think that Usman he'd struggle against Usman. Usman would not let him settle in, and he would not let him settle in and would be able to put damage on him as well. I think against Covington, Covington would try and take the fight to him, but I think Edwards would have much more success against Covington, where I think he can control the fight, even if Colby's constantly trying to make him work. I think that he's better in most phases, to the point that I think that after kind of an initial barrage from Colby, he can kind of settle into his own pace a little bit, where I think he's generally the better grappler and the better striker, and can control Covington in most situations. So I think it'd be interesting, but I'd still favour Edwards against Covington. But most of the interest I had in Edwards against Usman has kind of faded.
Well, we will see, and hopefully, for his sake, we'll be talking about some of those fights when they're announced, and hopefully when they come to fruition, maybe in the latter part of this year. Belal Muhammad, Damian Maia. I'm not sure how much time you want to spend on this, but a fairly routine victory for Belal Muhammad. Was able to not get sort of dragged into Damian Maia's world all too frequently, or at least for too long at once, and was able to seal for a pretty comfortable decision.
Yeah, I think that, like, obviously this wasn't like, there's not much to talk about here, but I would just say, like, shout out to Belal Muhammad for I think he understood Maia's game quite well, is like the main thing. He kind of scouted him and game planned for him well, because a lot of people, when Maia grabs a single leg, like you'll see people kind of often sprawl on it, which is a lot of the time what Maia wants. Like Maia, if you kind of sprawl, he'll kind of push you to the cage with it and then kind of start playing his half guard game. But Edwards kind of like really, I think, was very well drilled in the type of takedowns Maia wanted and the type of defense that allowed him to not get sucked into the game at all. And then and you could see that as the fight wore on, it was starting to really wear on Maia, and Muhammad was starting to take over, and put some damage on him towards the end of the fight. So yeah, solid performance from from Muhammad. But yeah, pretty cool.
It was, I mean, I think you basically covered all the points well. I mean, and now we get on to my man opening the main card, but ending, I guess, this main card discussion. Damian Maia, okay, might be his last fight, but don't worry, Brazil. We have got your next. He's not Brazilian, but he is the jiu-jitsu savant, the light heavyweight guard puller. pull Craig. He does it again somehow. I mean,
Yes.
I don't know what to say. It's just every fight of his is just bonkers in the best way possible. I mean, defeats Jamal Hill technically via armbar, sort of, or breaking Jamal Hill's arm and the rest sort of stopping the fight quite late. The image of him just sort of slapping a sort of floppy Jamal Hill left hand that's been sort of long broken is just one of those images that will forever stay with me. I mean, what more can you say? He just lures you into his world, pulls guard, and no one seems to be able to come out alive.
Yeah, like I was surprised, like looking at it now, 1 minute 59 into the fight. I was surprised how quick that happened. Like, really, like it felt longer whilst I was watching it live. But like, no, he really essentially immediately pulled guard, and then got to work. And I do enjoy Paul Craig, and I'm very glad that he kind of gets a run at the like bad grapplers at 205, and he can just like play a game from 2005 basically. But no, good fun. He is dangerous on the ground, but at the top echelon of MMA, people shouldn't be getting submitted when someone's pulled guard on.
I feel like there's a really nasty beatdown coming his way at some point.
It has got to be.
Like I'm looking and I'm just like how is he above Jimmy Crute in the rankings? Like, how has this happened? But I'll be intrigued, and I will always be cheering my Scottish boy on, because he is just a cracking figure and such a rarity. In all these in an era that is not entirely, but you think of a lot of the champions, and it is so much about the diversity and the sort of breadth and depth of the talents across all the sort of disciplines. To have a guy that's just like, no, I'm going to pull guard a minute into this fight and I'm going to beat you. It's just refreshing in a very bizarre sense.
Yeah, I do really like Paul Craig, and I will support him whenever he fights. But as you said, there's something bad coming his way probably. But yeah, who knows? Hopefully he can get it done.
Oh, certainly
keep surging up the rankings.
Come on, it's not too far away from him armbarring Jan Blachowicz for that title. We can all dream.
What scenes they would be. But no, also like just for like in terms of how he fights, but also Paul Craig seems like a solid guy. And I don't know if you saw kind of after because Paul Craig got the fight night bonus. I think that Jamal Hill and Paul Craig like went to a club after this, and Paul Craig bought him drinks all night, basically.
I did not see that.
Which is quite cool. You like think, your broken arm got me 50k, so I'll buy you a few drinks.
Lovely. That is cracking stuff. Right. To return to some sort of semblance of seriousness, we shall move to the prelims and the rightly so the fight of the night. I did have to double check. Brad Riddell, Riddell-Dober. I mean, we pointed it out beforehand. It was pretty easy for most people to see that this was going to entertain. I mean, the sort of southpaw orthodox, the Dober left hand versus the Riddell sort of pull back right hand. I mean, it all just sort of combined together to produce an absolute barnstormer of a fight for all of 15 minutes.
Yeah, it was really early. It was really interesting, especially early on, kind of the way this played out. I think you could see that Dober is certainly the kind of more athletic of the two. He was a lot quicker and hit a lot harder, and the straight left was early on was like money for Dober. Like he hurt Riddell significantly a number of times. Landing the straight left. But I think that you then saw kind of Riddell's experience coming in, and towards the latter half of the first round, and then like spattered throughout the fight, like because it really was kind of like a dynamic that played out at multiple different points, kind of coming in waves, which is like they're the kind of generally the best kind of fights. You get big momentum shifts, and each slightly adapting their things that will work in the moment, and they're always the fun fights. But I think you saw Riddell generally had a bit more depth, and when he could kind of extend Dober in exchanges, he would start to get the better of him and start to kind of like have the final say in kind of more deep and extended exchanges. And also his body punching started to play kind of a bit of an effect as well. I think that kind of slowed the forward pressure and momentum of Dober a little bit as well. But yeah, overall a brilliant fight.
Yeah, what I really love about Riddell, you mentioned it there, is those adjustments. I think I haven't got it on me, but I think a lot of his decision victories have been sort of 29-28, whereby he's, not taking the first round off, but he's taken the first round to sort of analyze the data, and in some fights he's struggled. Dober pieced together some good shots, had Riddell wobbled. I don't want to make it seem like he's just sort of comfortably winning, but he is so good at coming back in that sort of second and third rounds, and making sort of small adjustments and being able to grind out really good wins. But a cracking performance, and I'm not sure really either man's stock has gone down. That sort of pool of talent just sitting outside or just on the fringes of the rankings in lightweight is really something to behold, and there's just so many good fights.
Yeah, but I was starting off on all that basically, and it is weird, I suppose, how Riddell is able to adapt in fights that are generally almost always very high paced. He kind of is able to make those reads in very chaotic fights, which is very nice as well. Just a small extra point. But yeah, lightweight is difficult to match make badly, really. Lightweight and featherweight, so many good fighters in those divisions that whoever you put together is gonna make good fights, really. So yeah, both guys came out looking fairly decent, and yeah, excited for both of them going forward. Although I will say that I think that Riddell has a bit of especially kind of being he had quite a long kickboxing career. I think he's got a bit of a ceiling on him, and that he will be a good action fighter, probably a top 10 fighter, but I don't know how high he could go, really.
We will see in the coming months and years. Just to wrap up sort of 2-6-3 discussion, Eric Anders, Darren Stewart played out a pretty uninteresting fight. Anders winning by unanimous decision.
It was funny that it was just completely the opposite of their first fight. That was just wild, from start to finish. But a terrible fight, really.
Yeah.
Did not enjoy it.
Lauren Murphy, Joanne Calderwood, the classic women's flyweight split decision, 29-28. Lauren Murphy getting the win based on I think it was a second and third round she might have won. I can't remember exactly, but she will probably go on and fight Valentina. Any chance of an upset?
No. Not a chance. Basically,
I don't think either of these two would have posed a significant threat, and certainly that performance was not anything that made me reconsider that. Last one, I guess, although I'll give a quick shout out to Chase Hooper, still losing to awful strikers that are picked for him. I think Stephen Peterson had a 18-9 record before this fight. I guess a quick shout out to Evloev Dawodu opening up the card, which we did give a quick shout out to last week. Two guys that are sort of highly touted on the sort of fringes of the featherweight rankings. Good win for Evloev. Although I thought Dawodu certainly in that third round didn't do his stock any damage with his performance.
Yeah, I thought actually. Obviously Evloev won, but kind of my more interest in watching this fight was kind of how Dawodu managed to turn it around. And I think that kind of through a mixture of pressuring more in the last round, and combination punching, he managed to allow him to push forward, which kind of made Evloev telegraph his shots more. And then also kind of punching the combinations and especially going to the body kind of late as well made, I think, Evloev a bit more hesitant to press in and just like unable to press past a body shot, which he was able to do when Dawodu was swinging more, trying to counter at the head earlier on in the fight. But yeah, good win. But like that shows like body shots are very useful against wrestlers and more people should use them in that respect. So yeah, I think that both men come out looking fairly decent.
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, that basically concludes 263. I mean, as we've sort of demonstrated by how deep our discussion's gone, you know, a very sort of packed card, sort of from the prelims all the way up to the main event, and certainly some very high points in there. I mean, for the last sort of, I guess, 5-10 minutes, we'll briefly turn our attention to the card on the weekend, UFC Vegas 29. Although I imagine they might be slowly beginning to move out of Vegas in the coming weeks and months. I mean, I'll be honest, there's not a lot on this card that is particularly taking my fancy. I mean, maybe we'll get to the main event in a bit, but I say in a bit, very shortly. But anything other than that main event that is particularly interesting to you?
Matt Brown kind of coming back, although he's not very he's kind of a shell of himself recently. But I do like classic Matt Brown, and he did show some of it in the Baeza fight and Condit fight. I'm actually struggling to remember, to be honest, which is not very good. But like he fights well in spurts still, so maybe look for an interesting first round from Matt Brown. And then what we were talking about off air is the Marlon Vera Davy Grant fight, which to our surprise is a rematch that we had no idea about. And Davy Grant won the first one. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
Yeah, no, a Durham boy. He is on a very good 3-fight win streak. KO over Martin Day, and then a very impressive knockout of Jonathan Martinez, who'd previously beaten Thomas Almeida. So he comes into this on his certainly the best run of his UFC career, and comes off against sort of Marlon Vera that has been bouncing up and down as we were talking about off air. You know, fought Sean O'Malley, then sort of got the Jose Aldo fight straight after that, which maybe isn't a top ranked contender, but that was certainly, I think that was Aldo's first fight after losing the title fight against Petr Yan. So actually I take that back. Certainly was against a high ranked opponent, but then sort of settles down to David Grant, who I don't think is on the rankings. Although
that being said, before that fight, Aldo hadn't had a win at bantamweight, which is
very
strange considering. But you know, whatever, it worked out. It's Aldo, and he's brilliant.
Yeah, so it'll be an interesting one. I mean, David Grant has certainly, as we said off air, made a name for himself. We really should actually start recording this off air stuff, but made a name for himself with some flashy KOs in recent performances. I don't know how well that's going to work against a guy like Marlon Vera, who is very tough.
Very tough.
You imagine he will pressure lead forward. You know, does some great work in the clinch. But it'll be interesting to see if Davy Grant can go 2-up against Marlon Vera, or will he avenge that 2016 loss? Elsewhere, Julian LaRosa, Sung-Woo Choi could be an interesting scrap at featherweight, and featherweight normally does provide some good ones. Linux Windmills are back at it in the co-main event versus Sergey Spivak. I'm not entirely sure why or how he's still going. He recently lost to Derek Lewis and then to Chris Dorcas. Expect this to be the fight that he wins, so he sort of doesn't get to dangerous getting cut territory and still sort of mixes it around at the sort of lower end of pretty bog standard UFC heavyweight. He comes up against Sergey Spivak, who is, won 2 of his last fights, albeit against Carlos Felipe and Jared Vandeira. So take of that what you will. I'm not quite sure why it's co-maining, but
I never will be sure why they put heavyweights so high on the card.
that is a thing. And then I guess we get to the main event: Korean Zombie versus Dan Ige. Korean Zombie coming off the pretty disappointing, I imagine he'll see it as a pretty disappointing performance against Brian Ortega, in which he was comfortably outpointed over 25 minutes. And Dan Ige coming in off a really helpful fight that we can really learn a whole lot of. How long was it? 22-second victory over Gavin Tucker. I mean, Ige has mixed it up with Barbosa and Keita, so sort of more sort of elite competition, if you like. The Barbosa one, I think he won, but was quite fortunate to win, perhaps. And the Calvin Keita one, he was sort of comfortably outclassed across 25 minutes. I guess is it a case of sort of maybe returning to sort of Ferguson, Dariush, the ongoing Ferguson conversation? You know, that Korean Zombie that we saw against Ortega certainly did not look like the Korean Zombie we had seen. He is now, how old is he? 34, but has been in a fair few wars. Is it a case of if the best Korean Zombie turns up, he should be too much for Dan Ige?
Probably. I think that it's probably closer than maybe the Ferguson Dariush would have been. I think that Danny Ige does offer some kind of threat to him, and especially kind of like we've seen in his last fight, he's fairly dangerous early on. Is a decent counter puncher, and kind of. So yeah, it will kind of like depend, how it works out, how Korean Zombie turns up. But it could be kind of a bit of a battle of both men wanting to counterpunch here. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how that works out.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've at some points in Dan Ige's career, I've been quite impressed with some of his stuff, but in other times I've just wondered about his ability to game plan effectively, especially against some of those guys I mentioned, and I just wonder whether he might run into similar problems against a guy like Korean Zombie. But there is that performance against Ortega that does sort of weigh on me in terms of that really was a particularly concerning performance. He really didn't get a whole lot off. But I do expect Korean Zombie to be better. And I think his overall game and just his sort of experience at the top level probably gives him the edge for me. But I guess I think you are right in saying that it is perhaps closer than just simply saying if Korean Zombie is back to most of his best, then this should be comfortable for him.
Yeah, I think it'll be an interesting fight. That we'll probably definitely have more to say about in retrospect. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't know how high necessarily kind of like the title ramifications are for this one. I don't really see like there isn't that clear a path necessarily for either man to a title if he wins. I don't know like how well they'd match up against anyone above this if they win. So in a way that's taken a bit of interest off of it for me. But still, you never know, basically. One could come out and look massively improved and look very impressive. And we could be talking about them in a number one contender fight next, possibly. Yeah,
we will see. But I mean, I think I'm hopeful, given what we said about featherweight matchups, that I think this hopefully should fail to disappoint from that point of view, regardless of how the matchup plays out. But as you say, I think it'll be one to to analyze more profusely next week when we when we know what happens and see how those sort of intangibles map out. Any other sort of last minute nuggets of analysis you'd like to drop on this card?
Not really in terms of analysis. I can't remember if it was this week or last week. Well, I know last week we actually missed Clarissa Shields debuted in MMA, and she looked about as good as you'd expect someone with like 6 months of grappling to look. I mean, honestly, better, to be honest. She's had like 6 months of grappling, and she managed to, using a mixture of her physicality and kind of like toughness and kind of will to win, to kind of tough her way through and manage to win in a fight that was not going her way for a lot of the fight. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how she continues to improve, but she needs a long time. But she's like 26, she's still very young, so she's got time. So yeah, that was interesting. I think it happened at some point, I don't know, but Overeem has gone back to Glory. He'll be kickboxing again. So I don't know how strict Glory's drug testing is, but if not, we might see the return of Ubereem.
Yeah, that could be quite interesting. Juice.
Yeah. So get back on the horse meat, Overeem, and yeah, that could be some fun.
Lovely stuff. Well, we can look forward to that. I think those sort of undeserved, unwarranted allegations of drug abuse are a fitting way to call an end to the podcast.
I mean, they're not bad at, like, for Overeem, they're not allegations really, because he did test positive and like
this is
fairly high profile. So we're not saying he's done it again, but like talking in that, I think we can get away with that. That's fine.
Definitely. Well, yeah, as I said, we will draw today's episode to a close. Next week, we'll be back probably for a shorter episode to preview. To review all the fights that we just talked about there. To look forward to Cyril Gann, Alexander Volkov happening next week, which probably serves as a number one contender with the proviso of Miocic or Jones not returning ahead of schedule. And there's also Tim Elliott, Renato Moicano, Jai Herbert, which is a fun one. Rioni Barcelos, who we've been sort of eagerly awaiting his return. Andre Fili's always good for a fun scrap. So there's stuff to dig our teeth into, but we'll save most of that for next week. So with all that being said, thank you for listening. Stay safe, everyone, as ever. And we'll see you then.
See ya.